Congolese President Joseph Kabila has agreed to step down after elections next year. Kabila has been negotiating with the opposition after his final term ended earlier this month, but he refused to step down. So what's next for the Democratic Republic of Congo? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been on the brink of violence over the past 2 weeks. President Joseph Kabila's two-term and final mandate ended in mid-December, but he announced he will stay on and postponed elections. Well, that led to violent confrontations between security forces and anti-government protesters, and at least 40 people have been killed. Now there's a significant development. After weeks of tense talks with the opposition, President Joseph Kabila has agreed to step down by the end of 2017 under a last-minute deal. If this deal holds, it'll be the first peaceful transfer of power since DRC's independence in 1960. The deal is being backed by the Catholic Church. So let's take a closer look at this deal and what it means for the DRC. President Joseph Kabila will step down by the end of 2017. The deal says Kabila cannot change the Constitution to extend his mandate and run for a third term. And Kabila will appoint a prime minister from the main opposition bloc to oversee the transition. The transitional government is expected to be in place by March.
I'm happy to inform you tonight that we have managed to reach the end of the tunnel. The different delegates have come to agreement.
We also thought as a group that it's important that the service of the Prime Minister should return to the opposition. The bishop said the two parties, the participants, the African Union and the opposition all agree that the Prime Minister should come from the opposition.
Let's bring in our guests. In London, Michael Amoah from the Center of African Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies. In Pretoria, Matlock Lang Matlu, Executive Director of Excelsior Africa Consulting. And in Berlin, Marie-Roger Beloa, Editor of Africa International. And thanks to all of you for joining me. I'm going to start with the same question to all of you, just your initial reaction to the fact that it seems that a deal has been made. Michael, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, some sort of arrangement has been made. I think significantly that Kabila is not going to stand in the next election. That was the one main sticking point, and that's useful. So far, we don't actually know how this arrangement will be monitored or supervised, and so we just have to watch and see.
And absolutely, we are definitely going to dive into what some of the sticking points were and how this is actually supposed to play out. But first, Matlock Lang, your reaction to a deal?
Indeed, I think, it's laudable, considering that the DR Congo has been in crisis virtually since 1960, from the time of its independence. And, the country which is devastated by conflict and people taking its natural resources and its people having to live in a state of conflict, and many of the intelligentsia having to flee in exile. So I think it's a very useful pointer going forward, especially in a region where other presidents have sought to have third terms and changing their constitutions. Marie, your reaction?
Well, not sure there is a deal yet, and this is typically a non-event. When you know what is happening, what's going on, usually in the political scene in DRC, where the political class is just busy trying to get positions, to get jobs, to get advantages, and the reactions of people around me is that it opens an era of chaos. This is just cacophony. Nothing has been achieved, and as we speak, we don't know if Kabila has signed anything or he has sent his chief of staff just to be able, in the coming time, to say, well, this has been brokered without my my full power without my will, my full will. So
So
today
Marie, it
there are
sounds
too
like
many questions.
yeah, it sounds like you don't have a lot of confidence, and that maybe you think that this is still just a lot of posturing. And you did bring a good point. Our understanding is that Joseph Kabila has not signed anything yet. So do you think that this is a ploy?
Yes, Kabila is just trying to buy time. And listen, if this man wants to step down, if he really wanted to step down, why do we see him propping up the security forces with new equipment just to crack down on people? Every time, whenever you watch the events on TV, you see new equipment. We see them with everything is alluding to the fact that he's just trying to buy time and see how he can stay, because he knows that he has to deal with a very corrupt political class, even in the opposition. So he says in 1 year time, many things will be changing, and he will find a way to stay in power.
Michael, do you agree with Marie's skepticism?
Well, one key thing that worries me with this arrangement really is that one of the reasons for wanting to extend the election schedule to April 2018 was to have a new electoral register because of potential rigging in the current register. And it worked out that they would need at least 16 months from 2017 to have all the proper preparations in place to have the election in April 2018. If there is some sort of agreement, whatever the agreement is, for Kabila to step aside at the end of 2017, I cannot understand why the electoral timetable should also be scaled backwards to 2017. I'm thinking that if Kabila should step down at the end of 2017, that the country should carry on with the full-scale preparation to hold a proper election at April 2018. And I'm thinking if they try to fit all that into 2017 just because Kabila wants to preside over the election, they're really not looking forward to a proper election at all. And who knows, Kabila can come up with many excuses, for example, that the country is too large, no logistics support, even to delay the new electoral register and just put a spanner in the works. So I'm worried about the electoral timetable being brought to December 2017. And I'm also worried about the fact that there will be no signatures from Kabila or Tshisekedi, in which case each party, we cannot guarantee whether they will actually stick to the arrangement when it comes to it.
Matt Lang, do you share those concerns, and how is it really a deal if the people that it pertains to might not actually sign it?
Well, I fully, concur with my colleagues in terms of the pessimism about some of the issues. However, one needs to also recognize that, funny enough, unlike Burundi, Uganda, or Rwanda in that region, including Central African Republic, Kabila's hand has been forced. Most of those other leaders just plodded on and were able to either change constitutions or to remain in power without having to change constitutions, but not really have the rule of law. The DR Congo, indeed, yes, is a large country, as we know. In the elections of 2006, the international community spent over $500 million. The worry, of course, is that if for over 15 years, the DR Congo has not gotten its act together, whether even if you gave them 3 years, the electoral register and all those other challenges would be surmounted, considering the large size of the country and the paucity of infrastructure. I think here we might have to do with half a loaf of bread moving forward, ensuring that the international community is fully watching this situation, particularly the African Union, SADC, the Great Lakes region, regional organizations, amongst others, to ensure that, we do the best with what we have. Unfortunately, for a country whose resources are continuously siphoned off, the international community would not only have to bring in personnel, but material and other resources to try and ensure that these elections go ahead. We've had situations similar to this. Zimbabwe, the last elections, there was no electoral register. So we've got to do the best with what we have for the sake of the people of the DR Congo and peace in that region.
Marie, what's supposed to be different? What will be different this time to, if in fact there is a deal, to force President Kabila to step down when he already hasn't? Is this what's going to be different? What needs to be different?
Okay, what is different for the good is that the pressure of the DRC citizens has mounted is stronger, and the pressure from the streets, from the youth against a president who has failed to deliver. And there is, I would say, a general trend for presidents to accept to step down, even if there's still a lot of resistance. That's the good one. But the bad part is that Mr. Kabila, the Obama administration, has sort of been involved in urging Mr. Kabila to step down at the end of his term. And John Carey publicly did so, told him, you should go. And now, as we know, the Obama administration is leaving. And Mr. Kabila knows that very well. And he's watching the clock. And he says, now there will be Trump there. Trump with other concerns, definitely not, DRC will not be a priority. Maybe Syria or whatever in international affairs, but not DRC. And he knows that that pressure will be sort of diminished on him. And also, he has to deal with his opponents who are only thinking of, trying to share the cake against the will of the people. So I think he has a strong hand in the game now, and he's the one leading the game.
Michael, do you agree with that? I think she brings up a valid concern that is it possible that part of the strategy for President Kabila is to run out the clock until circumstances in the future are more beneficial to him?
A lot depends on who becomes the prime minister. I mean, technically, Etienne Tshisekedi will be presiding over a body that will be set up to oversee the implementation of the agreement, including the running of the preparation and the running of the elections. But I understand that Etienne Tshisekedi is too old to be the prime minister, so he will be different from who will be appointed as prime minister. And therefore, we're talking about a situation where Kabila is president, depending on who he picks as prime minister, pitched against Etienne Tshisekedi from the opposition side, also overseeing the whole electoral process.
So does this concern you?
Well, not concerned, but then the balance of power has to be operated very carefully to negotiate the way forward, because the Rassemblement consists of about 4 different parties, and I'm sure that each of them would want to have their own presidential candidate for the election. So after this arrangement, when the rubber hits the road, there will be lots of political parties competing within the same political space. So the unity of the Rassemblement is not going to be as strong and as solid as it is now when they have forced the hand of Kabila to come down. But at least the main thing really is that the constitution cannot be changed or touched until the next elected president comes in. So there is scope for parties to work together towards a good agreement if the political will is there. But the thing is that this particular agreement, no one actually has control over whether it will be successful or who actually cracks the whip if anything is going wrong.
And if I
That's
could,
just what we don't know.
no, actually, that was exactly where I was going with this next question from Matt Lang. There doesn't really seem to be any type of mechanism in place to oversee this. Yes, the church played a really significant role in this, but the church really isn't in any type of position to enforce this.
Well, this is where institutions become very important. And I think that the pressure that the people of the DR Congo, including a myriad of institutions, people in exile, we saw the riots at the DRC embassy here in Tshwane in South Africa a few weeks ago, which forced the closure, is going to be necessary. The international community, the media. I know that over the past few weeks, the government has shut down, the internet and social media access and stuff, but there are ways in which people are getting information about what's happening in the DR Congo. Of course, the problem with the AU is, and here not necessarily talking about size, but if you compare Burundi and the DR Congo and the fact that the AU failed dismally on Burundi and is challenged by Jammeh in Gambia right now, the question that we have to ask is, to what extent would then the international community play its hand on this particular matter? Certainly, of course, the UN is having a new Secretary General starting at the beginning of next year, and the Security Council, hopefully, much as it is seized by Syria, is possibly going to have an interest in this particular matter because, as you said, the DR Congo is a large country, and destabilization in that country affects, quite a huge swathe of Africa. We as South Africa have just lost a soldier in the DR Congo, and we're quite, concerned about the situation over there. To the extent that Mr. Kabila had an agreement in October, which has now been pared down in terms of the time that he spends in power, one would have to try and ensure that he's held to this agreement, the latest agreement. And I think the Catholic Church, amongst others, civil society groups, young people who have passed away, over 20 lives, those should not be in vain. And as much as possible, internal pressure and external oversight should hold the DR Congo to book. And hopefully that other leaders, we should have more pressure on them so that we don't have the disdain with which we have seen constitutions being changed in places like Rwanda and Congo-Brazzaville.
If I could just jump in for a moment, because I do want to talk more about the internal pressure. That's a great point that Marie brought up, and I will get to you, Marie. But for just a moment, Michael, you were shaking your head when Matt Lang was speaking. Why?
It would be very naive to think that international community can bring any pressure to bear on whether Kabila plays ball or not. The African Union is toothless. So far, the UN Security Council has not been able to weigh in on DRC, and no one can really control events if things go wrong. So far, as we can see, if Kabila is going to be there, depending on who he picks as prime minister, he will have control over the security apparatus. They can bully everyone in the country to rig the election if there is no mechanism in place to stop them. So we really have to think carefully about going forward how the Rassemblement thinks seriously about cross-checking or actually balancing any equation with regard to Kabila presiding over the election and sort of playing games with the political field. And that's why he wants to preside over the election and make sure that everything comes to a closure by the end of 2017, instead of the April 2018, which is the most practicable, best that experts have decided for the election to go ahead for.
So, Marie, it goes back to what you were saying. It seems that it's possible that President Kabila still holds a lot of the cards, but you did talk about internal pressure, and in fact, there are 175 newspapers and magazines in the DRC. There's hundreds of radio stations, there's TV stations, and people are allowed to speak out against the government. How significant is that?
Yes, this is sort of significant, and I agree with what my colleague said about the change which really comes from the people themselves, and that the international community just watching by and standing by and maybe just recognize the results you get, but they don't really interfere. One of the things people have been demanding is that Kabila stops cracking down on protesters. This is a major thing. If people are allowed to express themselves, partly in the newspapers and whatever, but they should also be really allowed to be in peace and not in danger when they are in the street protesting. And Kabila has been killing a lot of people. One point also I wanted to bring in is what the international community still can do. It's just to put pressure on Kabila on that point, that leave people alone. And also the UN has a role to play. I mean, they spend a lot of money in DRC, in the eastern part of the country, and nobody's really happy with the result. But what we saw in Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, is that we had a very complicated situation where the incumbent president was facing opposition and they had election. And that election was made possible by the UN. And when we had the result, the incumbent president could not overturn it or change it because the UN was there. So if I believe the UN has a role to play if they really say, we want to help you organize that election, and we get really involved with all the, whatever it takes to do that. That's one of the way we can go about it. And not just say maybe the European Union, maybe the US will say this and that, but they should really be hands-on there and say we organize elections.
Okay, Matt Lotlang, what is at stake for the DRC and their neighbors if this transition does not happen?
Well, you saw him. I mean, the first thing that is going to happen is, massive outpouring of refugees and people into exile, economic and political migrants. We saw that, when, last year in Burundi, and that has been happening in the DR Congo anyway. So that's going to happen. We already know, as my colleagues have said, that MONUSCO and others are already in the country. There's going to be a spillover into its neighbors. And we know the tension from the 1990s that has been in that region, particularly with Uganda and Rwanda. And sometimes there are forays into DR Congo, would remember Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia, were all countries involved in sending troops to the DR Congo. So the DR Congo, as during the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, one of the participants there said, you hold the DR Congo, you hold the trigger to the pistol in Africa. So we are quite aware that the spillover effects will be over a huge part of the African continent. Mining companies, timber companies, and many other, multinationals that have interest in the area, of course, also have been accused by the UN of fueling the kind of situation that we have of raping the DR Congo of its resources. So we are pretty concerned about the human impact, the destabilization into other countries, and holding back development on the African continent. Many people have said Inga could be supplying electricity to numerous African countries. It can't reach its potential if its people are constantly in exile. We see DR Congo citizens here, sometimes in South Africa, well-qualified doctors and others working as cargers. There's a waste of human potential. And indeed, not only internally but externally, we should try and hold the DR Congo to this shaky agreement, which would stop, the mass migration of people that we have seen from Syria, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and other parts of the continent. We can't continue as Africa to be suffering these debilitating effects of conflict and instability.
Okay, so we will have to see if this deal comes to fruition, and I'm sure we will call on you again for that discussion. Thank you all for that discussion. Michael Amoah, Matt Lotlang, Matt Liu, and Marie Roger Beloa. Thank you all very much. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime. Visit our website. It is aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team, bye for now.